Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Entra Chat. And today we have a very, very, very special guest. It's none other than Dirk-jan Mollema. He's an absolute fantastic person in the Microsoft community, in the cybersecurity space as well. He's made some amazing tools for all of the community, and he's found so many things and helped secure Microsoft and even other services. So, Dirk-jan, welcome to Enter Chat.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invite, and thanks for the nice intro.
I've been wanting to have you on for a long time, but then we had some recent news, and then I was like, now I have to get you on.
I listened to a few episodes, and I had my name. I heard my name drop a few times, and I was like, well, sure, we can do it.
Absolutely. So this is one episode where I want to just have a disclaimer. So I am a Microsoft employee, but this chat and my community stuff that I do is all my personal opinion. It's not Microsoft's opinion. So just wanted to clear that up. This is just a community thing that I do during my free time. And none of what we discussed today, etc., is anything official from Microsoft. So we don't want people misquoting us.
Yeah. I get it. I hope the disclaimer is not needed. But,
No, I mean, one of the Microsoft policies is you're free to post on social media and things like that, as long as we have that disclaimer saying that it's not an official Microsoft response on various topics. Cool. Awesome. So tell us about, how you got into this whole industry and, your journey to some of the big tools you made, like ROADrecon and so on, which are extremely popular. We want to know who's Dirk-jan and your story.
Yeah, so I've always had a bit of a development background, I suppose. I mean, I didn't study anything IT related, but I was doing like freelance web development on the side, and I guess that's kind of how I rolled into security, like making web apps, looking into web security, and then slowly going into network security, like enterprise security and red teaming. And I've always made it my approach to like understand how things work and to make my own tools for that, and to basically interpret the protocols. Because every time I find myself using someone else's tools, I'm like, okay, I know how to run this tool, but what does the tool do, right? Like, what is the protocol about? How do I even implement it? I mean, I'm not gonna implement everything from scratch. Like, I'm not gonna make like everything from hand. But a lot of things that I wanted to analyze, I just need to get a feeling around like how it works. And then,
Right. It's that curiosity, right? Like just being curious, pulling on a thread and then digging into that.
yeah, so I was doing this in the Active Directory space already for a while, and at some point, I guess it was at my previous employer, we had a assessment, network assessment, and they were like, okay, there's this one flag we want you to achieve. So there's this one goal to prove like company impact, and like, okay, can you hack like the CEO inbox just to prove that that you have all kind of access in the company? And I was like, sure, that we can do that. And they were like, yeah, but the mailbox is in Microsoft 365 or Office 365, I guess it was called back in the day. And I was like, okay, I have no clue how any of that works. Like, I was kind of avoiding the whole cloud thing, like all the other pen testers and researchers at the time. I figured it out. Okay, there's this identity provider called Azure AD. Apparently, it syncs from on-prem AD. And then there's this mailbox. And I started making a lab with that, mining setup, looking at all the synchronization and things. And that actually was my first like bit of research in that area. And I figured out that there was this thing called soft matching, which meant that if you created a user on-prem with the same like mailbox name back in the day, then it would match that to like a cloud user. So I did some recon of the cloud. And back in the day, it was still like the recommendation to have like no multi-factor for your break glass account. So they had the break glass account without MFA. And I found out that you could just create like a user with the same mailbox on-prem, and it would match that to the cloud user, and it would automatically override its password. So then I had their break glass account, which was global admin, and I got access to the mailbox. So that was kind of the flag achieved. But then I was
You
like,
make it sound so easy.
okay. I mean, if you put enough effort into it, then everything sounds easy once you explain
Once
it.
you do it. Yeah, true.
But it made me kind of realize, like, okay, there's this whole other product with a lot of attack surface that's just in generally quite unexplored. And in the first few years when I was looking at Entra, it really felt like nobody really cared about it. Like all the pen testers and security researchers, they were really focusing on on-prem Active Directory because that's what they understood. That's what they kind of liked. There was a lot of information about that topic. And everyone tried to avoid the cloud a little bit. But I was like, okay, well, there's this niche that's like completely unexplored with a lot of research opportunities. And I could just go into that. And well, that's what I did. And I'm happy that these days there's more people actually researching the cloud because it sometimes felt kind of lonely. And if you found something nice and you talked about it or wrote a blog about it, like everyone was like, oh yeah, it's cloud. And they didn't really care that much. Like you could see the difference in if I wrote a blog about Active Directory versus about Entra, like the views would be way lower for the Entra blog than about Active Directory thing. So I think now people are starting to catch up, but especially back in the day, there was a huge discrepancy between how many people were actually using the product and how many security research was done into that. And I think it was quite lacking. So I tried to change that a little bit, write my own tools, and figure out how the product works. And it kind of escalated from there, I suppose.
Nice. So, how did you get started with like ROADrecon? That's like one of your biggest tools, right? What are the other sort of tools that you made?
Yeah, so I started with ROADrecon, which is kind of like a reconnaissance tool. And the reason for that is that I wanted to understand a bit better how the whole Azure AD / Entra ID works. And at some point I found this like undocumented API that it was using, the legacy version of or like internal version of the graph.windows.net, which nowadays we consider a legacy API, but back then was the API for interacting with Entra. And I figured out that there was like a lot of more information in that internal version of the API. And even though it was called internal, like the Azure portal was using it, so it was not that internal since people could also use it. But of course, the problem with such an API is that like you don't know how it works. Like there was a little bit that we could infer from it because based on the OData specification, it tells you what kind of objects there are, what kind of properties there are. But still, a lot of the behavior you kind of have to sort of reverse engineer. And because it's a cloud, you cannot just download like a local copy and see how the binary works because there is no binary that you can access. So I had to kind of automate that, and I was like, I'm not going to do all of these API requests by hand because it's a lot of effort. And I just like wrote a kind of a framework or a tool around it that would like read this API specification and then translate that to a database model with like a very simple UI, so I could just click through things and make my own research easier. And from there, it kind of went on that I started to adding more tools to the framework. Like I tried to find all the authentication protocols, like the unofficial ones, the like sort of the legacy ones. Figure out how these work. I slowly added all of these to the toolkit. And at the start, I still relied on like the Active Directory authentication library or the ADL library to do all of the auth. But at some point, I figured out like if I want to like do this from a research point of view, I need to change some of the values, and the library is just not going to cut it. So in the end, I think I implemented almost all the flows by myself in Python, just to be able to change them, to mess with them, to add like undocumented fields that I found to the authentication flow, and just to change things up a little bit. That's where like the whole ROADtools framework started from.
Nice. So, when one of the questions that Erica asked is, what sort of tools do you use when you go around, trying these out? Do you use a lot of the standard tools available? I'm sure you have other things that you built you've not yet shared. the handy scripts and things that you made?
Yeah, so usually to analyze like what goes on, I use like an intercepting proxy, like just Burp Suite, which is like a standard web app pen testing tool. But it really helps with like analyzing what goes on. So for a lot of my like Windows research, like how Entra device join works or device registration works, I just set up a virtual machine. I configure it as a proxy, and then I look at like what goes on, like what request does it make, how does it talk to things like Intune, how does it talk to Entra, how will all these protocols work, and then I try to analyze that. And from there on, I usually write like a Python proof of concept, just like a minimalistic reproduction of the protocol, and then eventually I'll polish it up and add it to a more user friendly way, which is usually adding it to the ROADtools tool, which is the tool that I use for all the token manipulation, all the token operations, basically. So most of it is just like looking at web traffic, because everything is an API, so everything is web based usually. If it's endpoint research, sometimes you have to reverse engineer a little bit, but I'm kind of bad at that, so I try to avoid that as much as possible. And I rather just implement the protocol. And I also did that for like sporadically for some mobile things, so that's a bit harder to do because then you have to set up the whole emulator and proxy that through, make sure it still works with the certificate pinning and all of that. So I prefer to stick to Windows, which is very easily proxyable. So then it's easier to see like what goes on under the hood, and just try to understand all the API calls, all the protocols. So there's no like super special tools. I just proxy things through something where I can see what actually happens.
Yeah, because Entra, the surface you have is the web, right? It's HTTP. So everything that goes back and forth from the client or the browser to Entra, and the IDPs is all through the browser. So I guess it just makes it a lot more easier to see what's happening under the
Yeah,
hood.
exactly. And then you can also search like what kind of requests are going on, like what's the portal doing, where does it get its tokens from, and sometimes I just look at like the developer tools in the Azure portal, in the Entra portal, for example, to see like, okay, how does it get these tokens, how does it store them, things like that. Just like figuring out what goes on, whether that's in a browser or in the operating system. Approach is kind of the same, looking at the protocols, trying to understand the protocols, trying to implement the protocols. And then usually after that, you start messing with the protocols, like you run things in different order, you change a field here and there, you see how it behaves, you see if you can fit it in with some other protocols you've analyzed before and all kind of that. And that's kind of where the research part comes in.
Nice, nice. All right. So you've been doing this research for a while. How many years has it been?
I think on the Entra side, it's been 7 years, and on the AD side, it's almost 10, I guess. So I've been been doing it for a while, and just it's always the same concept basically. Just try to figure out how things work that I see during like a assessment or a review, and then you meet like some new product or some new feature that people are using, and then you're like, well, I don't know how this works, but sounds interesting, and this company is obviously relying on this for their security. So then you need to figure out, okay, how does it work, and what could possibly go wrong if you either use it wrong or if it's something implemented was wrong.
Cool, cool, awesome. So if I were to ask you, what were like the top three, the discoveries or interesting, whether on a scale of whether it was really hard, how much time you spent on it, and so on. So if you were to pick your top, the favorite three things you want uh, people to know about, let's start from the bottom, like the third, second, and then the the first one. I think we all know what the first one will be, but let's start from the bottom up.
Ooh, um, this is a hard question. Yeah, so I think some of the Windows Hello research was definitely in my favorites. So I think that's gonna make the top two. Maybe the number 3 is actually not an Entra bug, but an Active
Yeah.
Directory bug, which was
Yeah.
like Kerberos related. So that was like longer ago, where I basically found a way to hop between trusts using some Kerberos shenanigans, and it, like you would fake like an entire domain being added to a forest, and then you could like impersonate other users in the other forest. That was kind of like the favorite vulnerability from a technical side, I think. But not an Entra one. On the Entra side, I think it's going to be more about like the Windows Hello and primary first token things, because it's mostly like endpoint related. So it's very interesting to see how all these things behave, especially on Windows. How all the single sign-on works, figuring out what like primary first tokens do, and at the start, especially with primary first tokens, we're kind of like little hacks going on, I would like to say. So like there was this setting, if I remember correctly, that it would like do some magic with the multi-factor authentication. So if you would register the device and you would do that with multi-factor, then after, I think the MFA claim would automatically get added to your like single sign-on token. Just because, like I said, okay, this person registered the device, and then we're going to add the MFA claim to the primary first token. And I figured out like if you changed like the device owner like in between, like you could transfer that MFA claim to someone else's token instead, because it was kind of the assumption that this was the same user, but it wasn't actually verified that way. So it was kind of like a shortcut, where it was kind of possible to manipulate that, and then suddenly get the MFA claim for somebody else. That was a lot of fun. And back in the day, you could also like register devices with single sign-on. So if you landed on someone's endpoint, you could like borrow their session temporarily, register a new device, and then get a PRT like with single sign-on on their new device. So that was a very nice way of persistence.
Nice. Yeah. So like how do you go about those? Is it again just with the browser tools and burp suite? Like what's that what you use?
I mean, for the protocol analysis, yes, but I'm really into like logic flaws. So I really like thinking about, okay, I have this protocol. What can it do? Where does it fit in with the other protocols? How can I kind of merge these things together and do something that's like unexpected? So it's not like just like manipulating the protocol by itself, but it's more like figuring out, okay, what if I use this protocol in a slightly unintended way, or if I combine this with something else? Like, does it work? Like the normal flow to get like a primary first token is you authenticate, and then you get the token. I'm like, well, what if I authenticate with single sign-on? Can I then still get a token? And does that like defeat some of the security expectations that people have around this? That is like tied to a specific device, but what if you can link it to like a new device that you just created as the attacker? So that's kind of my focus point, I would say, just thinking about these logic issues that may exist, like combining things in different order, combining different protocols together. Like a while ago, I did research also on like how primary first tokens behave on macOS. And it turned out to be a completely different protocol. And then you could kind of combine that with the Windows protocol to, again, bypass some of the security assumptions. So it's just like you find one thing and then you're like, well, I know a little bit about that related topic from like a different attack avenue. And then you combine that and suddenly things behave in an unexpected way that wasn't quite intended, but still works. So that's, it's kind of like the thinking about it, combining things and just being, well, I've looked at this at some point. That's how I mostly do with my research, which is not a very reproducible way, I would say, but that's just how my brain works.
I mean, that's how you connect the dots. So that's an interesting thing I want to ask you, right? So how do you keep track of it? Like, what are the tools you use to, like, do you write down your notes or use paper and pen or electronic, or is it all in your head?
I wish I would be better at note keeping. If I'm lucky, I make screenshots somewhere, or I still have like a copy of the virtual machine. But usually, like, sometimes I put, if it's really hard to remember things, I'll put it like in OneNote or something, but it's just going to be like a few lines of code. Oh yeah, I did this, this, and this. But like most of my documentation is writing the tools. Like I write the tool, then I know how the protocol works, then I have it implemented and I can come back to it. But quite often, like I might look at something and then I'm like, okay, I don't really find anything here. And then maybe a year or so later, I come back to that topic via like a different route. And then like, well, I've looked at this before. Maybe I can do something with it now. And then I sometimes have to start again a little bit from scratch because I forgot all the things. Or if I'm lucky, I still have the traffic saved, because like if you proxy everything through a tool and you save all these requests locally, then you still have the original traffic, so you can go back to that. But yeah, I'm not a very structured person. So usually I remember like some bits of it, and then I have to go back and like, okay, how was it actually again? And secretly, I also like read my own blogs quite often. So whenever sometimes I have somebody asking me like, oh yeah, how does this Kerberos thing work? And I'm like, I don't know. It's like
Yeah.
been 2 years since I looked at it. Let me look at my own blog, and then I probably figure out again like what I was thinking at the time and why I did things in a certain way. And it usually comes back to me. So like writing a blog is also like a way to kind of push yourself to document things and to share it with your future self as well.
Yeah, I mean that's how your mind works, right? And you sometimes able to connect those dots, and yeah, you can't really express to people how you end up doing it, but yeah, I do get it. But I like the idea of the tip about tooling, right? So you write the scripts, and like that's basically your sort of things to repro, and the comments you write in that will help you go back and refer to things. And then when something's changed as well, right? Because you have the script, it worked at some point, and then the APIs and things change on
Yeah, then you have to
on the
run the
other
script
side.
again, and then it doesn't work. And you have to figure out why. And yeah, that's one of the problems with the cloud. Like you can never go back to the old vulnerable state, right? Like I can tell you about a vulnerability, but I cannot reproduce it again to make sure that I got everything 100% correct. So then I have to kind of trust my screenshots and whatever, that the vulnerability was actually there, because you cannot go back to an old vulnerable version to like try it out or try some variants anymore. Because once it's fixed, it's just fixed for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And the new features come around.
Yeah, and it's great to like kind of keep pushing each other. It's better that like researchers keep pushing the products than that attackers keep doing it, because of
Exactly.
course, like real world attackers, they also keep pushing it. Sometimes it's just hard to respond like attacks like attacker in the middle, because there's no easy out of the box solution to block all that kind of stuff. But with all the new features, especially that mitigate some of the research that's been done over the years with like endpoint attacks, token stealing attacks, it's always great to like push these boundaries. And of course, like pushing the boundaries, like if Microsoft adds a new security feature, and like, oh, okay, I wonder how it works. I wonder how that operates, what I can do with that, and I wonder how that changes like the attack surface, for example. That's also like a good way to well, the pushing basically is usually mutual.
Yes, yeah. And I remember when the intra external auth method feature was released, like it was a feature that I worked with one of the PMs on, delivering that feature, but I knew you would have a fun time with it because it's a way to do another auth. And I think you built a proof of concept, right, where you run your own IDP, you start it off in the console, and you can then see how all of those flows work. So
Yeah, that was also an interesting one to implement, and I actually use that because when I run a training class, like I often have people share accounts, but I don't want to bother with everybody setting up their own like multi-factor authentication, because if I have to get 20 people in the class with the same account and all have to configure MFA, that's kind of annoying. So I just add like an external authentication method, and I put the lab account in scope, and they can just hit next, and then they automatically like do the MFA. So I really like that there's this kind of flexibility in the platform, that you have support for external providers. But of course, it also provides an opportunity for people like me to kind of play around with it, mess with it, and use it in non-intended ways that weren't actually of course, intended in the design of that feature. And actually, the external auth method is a really good one, because I had this like possibility like a couple of years ago where I had the ability, like from the Entra Connect sync, Like it used to have the rights to modify all kind of policies in the tenant. I was never really able to figure out like a good way to kind of abuse that. But when the external auth methods came out, that was also added into the authentication method policy. So then suddenly there was this path that you could compromise Entra Connect, and then you could modify the external auth methods, and then you could like completely bypass MFA that way. So that was a nice extra basically opportunity where there's like at the point when I researched this, was not really a way to abuse it. Then there's new features that kind of play into the whole scheme, and then suddenly new opportunities. So usually I keep like some things on the shelf if I cannot find an immediate abuse perspective for it, and then I sort of go back to it later if there's some new possibilities, or you think about, oh, I can actually do this like in this certain way.
Awesome. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Any sort of extension where you can extend Entra and with hooks into doing things is good from, the platform perspective for people to build and, add custom stuff into it.
And there's also this annoying guy from the Netherlands who's doing like some completely non-intended functionalities and just like making fun of the whole feature.
Nice. Cool. Awesome. So we spoke about the first two, and let's come to, the big one, the big kahuna that you discovered. So tell us about, what the vulnerabilities. You even have a CVE assigned for that one, right?
Yeah, and that's pretty rare to get a CVE for a cloud vulnerability. That's only been there for like a year or so. That MSRC even assigns CVEs for their for critical cloud vulnerabilities. Yeah, so this one is also like it has kind of a backstory, I suppose, because actually think I started looking into like alternative ways to go from on-prem to the cloud like last year in the summer because there was some hardening around the Entra Connect permissions, like the attack that I talked about previously with the external auth method that you could provision from on-prem that was fixed because like all the permissions were just removed. And I was like, okay, there was this other thing that I like looked at like way back in the day, which was Exchange Hybrid. And it's also, I think it was actually one of the first times where I looked at an Entra tenant and they were using Exchange Hybrid. And it kind of seemed odd to me that the on-prem authentication was happening to the same service principal. So they were doing like OAuth to their Exchange on-prem, but it was the same service principles for Exchange online. And at the time, I never really had the time to dive into that because I was on the schedule, the assessment ended, couldn't set up like a whole Exchange hybrid lab, which is a lot of work, I can tell you, to get it working. Yeah. Then I came back to it and I'm like, okay, well, apparently there's this Exchange hybrid that like shares this service principle because otherwise you cannot do OAuth to the same service principle on-prem. And it also means that they have to share like some authentication material because if you want to do OAuth to a web app, normally the web app has to prove that they're that app via like a certificate secret or a client secret. So I'm like, okay, there's this on-prem secret apparently, so it could be possible to abuse if you have access to the on-prem environment. So then I actually did take the effort to install Exchange Hybrid. I'm not sure if I ever completely got it to work, to be honest, because like the install wizard was giving me all kind of errors. And I'm like, yeah, setting up all this DNS externally. I don't want to do that. So I sort of a very hacky version of Exchange Hybrid working in my lab. And I started to look at some of these protocols. And at that point, I was just staring at my screen because it was doing all kind of protocol that I had never seen, that I wasn't even aware of existed. And then there's kind of like sort of I don't know if you want to call it like a spider sense or something like that. But if you've been doing research for a very long time, then you kind of know like if you're looking at something that has a lot of potential to like be broken. And like this looks kind of weird. Like this doesn't look like it was supposed to be there, or that I'm supposed to look at this, or that this was designed with all of the security properties in mind. That's kind of how I went to the whole like actor token thing. So for those who read the whole research, like Exchange, if it wants to talk to Exchange on-prem, if it wants to talk to Exchange online, it's such a hybrid setup. It kind of has a way of impersonating users using what I call actor tokens. I don't know if there's an official Microsoft name for it. I like to call them actor tokens. And basically it authenticates as itself, as Exchange, it embeds that Entra issue token, it embeds that in an unsigned token, and the unsigned token, it just says, I'm Exchange and I want to impersonate like this specific user when talking to Exchange online. And you could change that to any user in the tenant, and basically like talk to the Exchange online service as anybody, which makes sense, right? Because it's Exchange hybrid. There has to be a way to impersonate these users. So I was looking at it last year, and then I was kind of probing at it, and I couldn't really find like a way other than accessing Exchange Online to really abuse that. And SharePoint for some reason, because it also worked for SharePoint. So I was like, okay, I can Exchange and SharePoint, which is nice, but it wasn't exactly the attack vector that I was looking for. And then I was like preparing the talk about this. So I had a few like things in my backlog, and I was like, okay, let's just make a talk about like hybrid lateral movement. And a couple of weeks before the presentation, then I usually like make all the tools a bit nicer. And all these hacky proof of concept that I have, I port them to my normal tools. And there was a few alternatives, and one of the alternatives was like asking for a graph token or an Azure AD graph token, and that actually worked. I was surprised when I was looking at that because, okay, Exchange can talk to Exchange can talk to SharePoint. That makes sense. But does Exchange really need to impersonate anybody like in Entra? Probably not. But maybe the Exchange online side, but definitely on the on-prem side. And it kind of raised the whole severity. So like, okay, now if I compromise Exchange on-prem, I can actually compromise the entire tenant, because if you can talk to the graph.windows.net and impersonate the global admin, then yeah, you can just modify whatever. You can add new global admins with credentials that you control. Then you can even log in like interactively into all of these portals. So that was kind of bad. And then I decided, okay, well, the hybrid part, I didn't find it that interesting. That's
and at this point, you still had to compromise a hybrid Exchange.
Yeah.
First,
so
right?
Really
before you're able to.
Like post-exploitation lateral movement. So you compromise on-prem, and then you can move to like the cloud part if they have Exchange hybrid, which not a lot of companies have these days, but it's still out there. And at the time, it was only to Exchange online and SharePoint online. So it's like, okay, that's not super interesting, especially since everybody has this. But then I found out this was actually for the graph. And then I was like, okay, this makes it quite a bit more severe. So maybe I should send in a report to MSRC before I talk about this, rather than them finding out at Black Hat. So I was writing that report and then like making like a night walkthrough so that they can they reproduce it. And then I decided to mess around a bit more with the tokens. And I already tried this for Exchange and for SharePoint, where I like changed the tenant ID, because there are these different tokens. Like the actor token was obviously issued for my tenant, but there was also a tenant field in the impersonation token that I created around that. And then I changed that for the graph, and I changed it actually to my real tenant where I have my email. And then it gave me a very weird error message. It said like, hey, this user doesn't exist. I'm like, well, I know that my lab user doesn't exist in my prod tenant, but that's not the error message I'm looking for. I'm looking for like access is denied because this token is like from a completely different tenant. But that's not what it said. So at that point, I was like, oh, okay. Now I need to figure out how to find the right user. And I played around a bit with the fields, and I put in the correct ID of a user that actually did exist. And then I was seeing data like from my real tenant rather than from my lab tenant. And at that point, I was like, oh, okay, does this really work? So I tried it with a few more of my test tenants just to be sure it actually worked. And it did work. So then I figured out, okay, well, I can do this cross-tenant. So I no longer need access to anybody's Exchange hybrids. I can just do it from my own Exchange hybrids. And basically found out you could do it with any tenant as long as you knew this like unique ID, the net ID of a user, which is like I think internal attributes going back to the Microsoft account days, sort of. So that was kind of bad.
So you started calling some graph APIs and it just worked. So how, when you come across something like that, like how did you feel at that moment?
I was mostly just really stressed out because I was like, this is big. And I was also like, I'm not sure I want this responsibility. So I still have like a screenshot because I have a smartwatch and it tracks like my stress levels. And you can identify like the exact time where I found the vulnerability, because after that, my stress levels for the whole day were like up like
Yes.
enormously.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well, this is really exciting. So I messaged like a few people like, oh my God, I have this really bad bug. I think I actually tried to message Nestory, Dr. Azure AD, but he was on holidays that week.
Yes.
So I wasn't able to tell him about it.
Right.
And at that point, I decided, okay, I need to get this report out as fast as possible so that people can fix it. And then it's not my responsibility anymore, because I don't want to have the ability to just compromise anybody's tenant. I just want this to get fixed as soon as possible so that I can relax again.
Right. So I do have a question at this point, right? Like a really sort of an ethical one. It's something you found, it's huge, right? And a bad person can do a lot with it, right? And they stand to gain so much as well, right? From something like that. So how did you did the thought even cross your mind?
I think the thought only crossed my mind like after I sent the report. And then when I was
Right.
calmed down a little bit, then I was like, oh, this could have been interesting to the right person. But like in the theoretical case that you would sell such a thing, which I don't think I would ever do, it's not going to be abused by like the good guys, right? Because anybody putting down like serious money for this kind of thing, it's going to be like used in a way that's not exactly what I would like for it to be used. And it's not something like you can use in a very like targeted way, because it's everybody is affected. So once the knowledge is
Exactly,
out
right.
there,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
can be used against you as well. So it's not, the only way to actually deal with this was to get it fixed as soon as possible. And like hopefully no one else would have had access to it before. That was more my concern. Like, did other people find this out? Did other people have the ability to do this?
Would you do anything different the next time you come across, like, based on the experience you went through now? Are there things you would do differently the next time?
So maybe I would take a little bit more time to analyze the full impact, because like I first sent the report to MSRC, and at that point I mentioned like, yeah, I don't know exactly how I can get these net IDs, right? Because that was the only requirement, that like this net ID attribute. I know probably you can get it somehow, but I think you should already fix it like this without knowing it. And then after, I only started thinking, okay, how can I get these? And I came up with several strategies actually to get them. So that's like the only barrier at the point where I submitted the report was that you needed to know this piece of information, which was a bit of a mitigating factor. But after I found out there's like several quite easy ways to obtain that piece of information, so it kind of increased the whole scope. I don't think they treated it any less severe because of that, so it doesn't really make a difference in the end. But next time, just for my own like peace of mind, just make sure you have the full flow figured out, so that you can give the full story directly. But other than that, I think it was handled quite well. It was fixed very fast. So I don't think there was anything that we should have done differently in that sense.
Nice. Okay. So tell us about the experience of you like sharing that and till it got fixed and so on. How did it go?
So after I posted about it, I mean, my phone was just like ringing nonstop with all the notifications the days after. So that was kind of wild. I think the wildest thing was that somebody on LinkedIn suggested I should get a Nobel Prize for it, which I think was a little bit over the top, very much over the top. It's and people were starting to make like reaction videos with all the weird with like weird poses for YouTube and all of
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
How did I end up in this place? I'm just doing like some research here. So it kind of blew up. And it even made like, in the Netherlands, it even made what I would say like the normal people news. So the non-tech news would actually,
Yeah.
a journalist from like a national news network came and wrote a story about it. And they were like, well, do you want to do an interview for TV? And we want to send like a camera crew over. And I was like, well, I'm in Rome at the moment, so I'm not sure that you want to come all the way over here. So then we did it over Teams, and they aired like 5 seconds of the whole interview. But that was definitely, I didn't expect it to blow up as much as it did, even though of course it was
Right.
quite a finding, and I don't think I'll ever top it again. But that's okay, that's fine. I don't need to ever find it again. But
On Twitter, it's Flangwick. He asked, "What color of Lamborghini are you going to buy after getting the bug bounty for this?"
yes, yeah, I knew that question would be coming. Like, there's been a lot of discussion about like bounty amounts. On purpose, I didn't mention any bounty amount because, like, even without mentioning it, all the discussion is already about like, oh, how much did you get paid? How much should
Yes.
Microsoft pay you for it? Like, I don't really want that whole discussion. So that's kind of why I avoided. But it's definitely not money that buys you a Lamborghini, but it was still a nice amount.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I definitely need to buy you a coffee the next time I see you. Or beer or your favorite beverage.
Yeah, it's more the personal gestures for people that are appreciated than like people saying like you should get like so many millions for this. So all the people reaching out and supporting, that was like, I appreciated it way more than like getting some money for it. Even though, of course, the money is always a nice factor, but it was really humbling, like how much people appreciated it, how many people reached out to congratulate, all of that. That's was really like a super positive experience from the community and from Microsoft as well.
Exactly. Like it's like we are very much in the Microsoft community. All of us are indebted to you for, your approach, and not just this, right? Like all of the work that you do. And for me, like all of the security researchers that are in the community and keep sharing and helping improve, our security really help, because it's more like it's us versus the bad guys, right? So that's the bigger sort of the battle that's going on.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's all like a lot that we can learn from each other. So I also learn like a lot of things from the people that aren't in like security research per se, but are on more of the product side and that work with these products. Like an example is Rudy, who does a lot with Intune research and writes a lot of super in-depth blogs about Intune. Like that's what helps me a ton with my research, because people talk about features that I never knew about. And this whole like niche expertise that people have that are on the implementation side, that's like also very useful to know from a research point of view. And also I asked some people in the community when I was looking at the Exchange Hybrid, like, okay, how much do people actually use this? Like, is this still common, or does nobody really have it? And they also provided like valuable feedback, like how much is what actually used. And also, well, I tried not to look at SharePoint hybrids, but I, I touched upon it a little bit. And Exchange Hybrid was like way more common than SharePoint. So like, okay, that's where I focus. Because that's sometimes the problem of being a security researcher. Like, you don't know what people actually have in their environments. So that's why I'm really happy when I get to do like some real client work rather than just research. Then I can see what people have in their environment, how they're using these products, and what like their expectations are about these products that I may not be aware of. Because like I can put something in my lab and find like a vulnerability in something that like literally nobody's using, but then what's the point in that? Everybody is using a feature in a certain way, even though it's maybe not intended to be a security feature, then of course it's interesting to look at, does it actually behave as a security feature where people have it. So it's that not just sharing between researchers, because of course we learn a lot from each other and other researchers, but especially also people that just share like from the community, all the MVPs sharing like the new product features, the new ways to deal with that actually analyze about all of it. It's also super valuable, and we all keep learning from each other.
Yeah, exactly. Like some of the names you mentioned, like Rudy, on all of the Intune stuff he writes about, like I start reading it and halfway through my head starts hurting. And he goes into so much depth about, how like join works and like enter
Yeah.
join and like, all of the different API calls and so on. So it's always a fun read, reading his stuff. And yeah, as you said, it helps everyone build on top of each other, right? Like the research we do, and it's a team sport, as many people say. It
Yeah, and
is.
when people are talking about like API calls and things, I'm like, oh, and now we're talking. Like, don't tell me how to click the button. Tell me what it actually does, like how it actually works, what it talks about, like what the protocols are involved, what all the nuances are. That's where I start to get interested in things. But yeah, my head usually also hurts after I look at too much research.
So there's a interesting question from Dennis DNS in it. He asked, he'd love to know how many undisclosed vulnerabilities and unsupported APIs you're sitting on at the moment.
I think 0. I don't think I had any. So like my talk at Black Hat and DEF CON last summer was kind of like my house cleaning of all the previously identified like hybrid vulnerabilities that I had out of the way. But I don't think I have any like super exciting like undocumented things that I'm not talking about. I mean, there's still a few things that are under disclosure with MSRC that will get fixed hopefully in the next few months. I mean, there's always some vulnerability or some weird thing going on, but no, it's mostly no. And I don't hoard 0 days or something like that. I just hoard non-vulnerabilities that behave in a weird way that I can back reference later when I actually find a way to abuse it.
Nice. Yeah. So Sapir had a question as well, like how do you decide what to research next? Like you already shared a little bit about, Exchange and how you started looking into that. But like what's a typical day you get up and how do you decide like what am I going to look at today?
Yeah, so I think there's various like inputs that I have. If it's about like protocols and tools, then it can be something like opening a GitHub issue, some question that comes up during one of the classes I teach about Entra security, or something that I encounter in a real environment, or just a new feature that comes out. So there's quite a few like features that I haven't looked at as much in depth as I would like. So I recently looked a little bit at like global secure access, but it's not something I've looked at extensively. I'm also interested in like the token protection thing because it's also recently went GA, and that means also there's probably changes in how it works. So those are some things on my backlog, but usually whatever piques my interest that I encounter. And of course, if I'm in a client environment, then there's more motivation to find something in there because then you can actually directly help your client with that. Which was actually how I also got into the whole Intune thing and Intune certificates, because they had some misconfigured certificates, and that was also a way to like find a way to abuse that, but also like immediately give them feedback, like, okay, this is not something that people are doing yet because it's not really researched yet, but this is something that could happen in your environment, so you probably want to get this fixed anyway. And that's like I like these kind of research things because they're using it, it's relevant to them, and if they have it, probably some other people also have it, and that's why I then research these things.
Nice. So Joe had a question. Was it Joe? No, it was Erica. Erica Zelik had another question. So she asked, what are your top 3 recommendations for configuration changes that will give, the most bang for the buck for Intune?
For Intune, yeah, so Intune is one of these research areas where I still have to look into that because every time I look at Intune, there's like way more features than I thought were there. So every time I look at it, it's like,
It's
oh,
new.
there's this thing, there's this thing, and there's this thing. But I think a lot of so there's actually quite a bit of like changes in approach with regards of Intune. Which is actually a very interesting topic because it goes back a bit into like attackers and defenders pushing each other. And what you see a lot is that like attackers, they're now doing all kind of phishing, and then you have policies like device compliance, which are very effective against like these kind of credential phishing. But then like maybe the next step for attackers is to actually try to get a device into Intune and get that device compliant so that they can bypass that. And then there's this autopilot thing. There's a bit of discussion whether autopilots should or should not be considered a security measure, which was also interesting topic of discussion when I asked people about that, because a lot of them were like, yeah, it's not a security feature. And I'm like, well, everybody is using it like it is a security feature. as the thing that stops like attackers from registering fake devices or from users enrolling arbitrary devices. So that's an interesting point of discussion where maybe there's a bit of a mismatch between what people are actually doing in that space and what is supposed to be a security boundary or not. But I think just like tightening in Intune, like who can enroll devices, what kind of devices do you allow to be enrolled, and especially like scoping some of your more like sensitive configurations, like certificates, VPN profiles to like devices that you really trust, like based on their like autopilot tag or something like that, which is way harder for attackers to be spoofed than just like enrolling a virtual machine or something like that. So locking that down, locking down who can enroll these kind of devices, what kind of devices you allow, whether you allow like BYOD, that kind of things. That's I think where the Intune wins are at. And if you roll out certificates via Intune, I would really look at like how are these templates configured, because there's a lot of potential for misconfigurations there, I would say. Not sure if these are three things, but that's what I could come up with regarding Intune.
No, yeah, I mean that's like I personally was an Intune person before I joined the Entra team, and yeah, it's a fascinating area because you have a lot on the client, right? On the device side of things. Unlike in Entra, it's all mostly the cloud, and you can see things that are going over the wire. So Joe had a question. He was asking about how do you avoid the temptation to look at other tenants when you find different vulnerabilities.
Yes, I guess that only applies to the one cross-tenant vulnerability that I found. The only temptation I had to really resist was like adding myself as a global admin in the Microsoft tenant. That would be like nice, like my badge. But I know like I get in trouble if I do that. So that's why I resist the temptation. But other than that, like I don't really care that much about like reading other companies' information. I've been a pen tester / red teamer for so long that I've seen so much stuff at companies, and like you're used to it, right? You're used to dealing with other people's data. You know, it's not your data. You know, you cannot look at it. You can keep it with you. You're just there to help improve the security. So looking at other people's tenants and reading other people's mail is not something that's even remotely interesting to me. So that's kind of how I avoid the temptation, I guess.
So when you do some of these, like, do you share with others so they can also run and test? Like, if you want to do more validation, or do you just go off on the validation that you do yourself?
Depends. So most of the projects I would say I do by myself, but I've also done some projects like together with Fabian Bader, which you also had on the podcast a while ago, and we looked at like these Entra like first party app scopes, and that was like a very nice collaborative project. I've done some collaboration on the macOS side, for example, with Olaf, because I have no clue how Macs work. I only know how to deal with the Windows. So that's also a nice collab. So sometimes I share things if it's in an area that I'm talking about with other people. Otherwise, it's sometimes with myself, just by myself doing it. But yeah, it's definitely interesting to research with people that have different perspectives, and especially with people that are either on the defensive side or more the implementation side, because they have just so much experience of how people are actually using these things and how people do configure things like conditional access policies, what they see in practice, that if you have a pure research point of view, you just don't have that. So just doing like research in a lab with like your blinds on and not seeing anything outside your own box. That's not always useful. You need to have some external input to actually find like an impact.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you tell us about like the stuff that you do. You do training as well from time to time.
Yes, I actually do quite a lot of training because it turns out that Entra is a very complicated topic, and and people want to know how it works and how to secure it and how to advise their clients on that. So I do quite a bit of training on that for like research for pen test companies or companies that have like internal security teams. And I enjoy like teaching people, and it also provides me with like new perspectives, right? Because you quite often have smart people in the class that ask good questions, like, well, I don't know how this works, but maybe I can figure it out, or we can find it out together. And sometimes I also learn like things from people that they tell me that's how it works. So I guess I've always liked like sharing knowledge and just teaching others how things works, and teaching them the joy of working with Entra, and sometimes the pain of working with Entra.
Yeah.
But that's something I enjoy a lot. And next to that, I also do like consulting every now and then. Actually, look at real world environments, which is a very useful input. And of course, any time I have left, I do on spending on research time or just answering my emails.
If someone wants to reach out, they can reach out on your website, right? To book you.
So the contact info is on my website, outsidersecurity.nl. And before people ask, like, yeah, it's just me. It's not a company with like 50 people. I don't want to manage people. I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm bad at. I wouldn't want
Yeah,
to be my own manager. So I'm just going to keep it that way.
nice. Yeah, that's one of the things I personally don't want to do, managing people. I prefer working with the machine. Typing,
Yeah, exactly.
writing code is so much more fun.
Like code is usually doing exactly what you expect it to do without having an emotion about it.
True, true. Yeah, for me, it's an art form, managing people, and I would
Yeah,
prefer leaving it to
absolutely.
others.
And at some point in life, you have to realize you cannot be good at everything, and other people are better at dealing with different topics than you are.
Absolutely. So there was a question from John T about Dutch pancakes.
Oh yeah, we have the best pancakes.
The Dutch pancakes, right? I'm from Sri Lanka, and we have a bit of a Dutch history. So there are lots of food and other things that we have in the Sri Lankan culture that come from the Dutch culture as well. So and I didn't even know that about that. We thought they were like native Sri Lankan food and different things, but it ended up being things that we had borrowed from the Dutch culture. So lots of shared stuff there.
So what's your favorite pancake then?
So my wife makes the small ones, what do you call it?
Profiteers.
Profit, yeah. So the Aussies also love it. You can go out and get those. But I mean, she puts a lot of sugar, strawberries, and chocolate syrup. And all that. So it's not a very healthy breakfast.
I mean, usually pancakes are something that you make for kids, right? Because they like it,
Yeah.
but it's also a guilty pleasure for adults. So I like my pancakes with like a mix of savory and sweet. So cheese and bacon, but then also like a maple syrup on top for the sweet flavor, and that's like excellent. And actually, I think I'll make some pancakes this week because just hearing questions being asked about them, I'm like, I've eaten pancakes in a while. Need to remedy that.
Yeah. My wife hates it when I do it, but I also dip it in curry and then have it. So it's like
Sorry.
mixing, yeah, with especially with crab curry. It's really good.
All right, I haven't tried that yet. I have to try that at some point.
Yeah, it's a different fusion thing.
Might be a good mix.
Cool. Dirk-jan, it's been such an awesome time having you on EntraChat, and thank you so much for sharing, your journey and all of what you've been working on. You're very generous with your time, writing blog posts and sharing with the community. And so it is very, very much appreciated. You help a lot of other researchers and a lot of up and coming researchers. They look up to you quite a lot. And we in the Microsoft community are lucky to have you, and you focusing on the Microsoft stack is a thing. I feel that we are lucky to have you on our side.
I mean, I enjoy sharing knowledge, and I really like seeing more people pick up these topics, especially if people like pick up something that I looked at a few years ago and then find new stuff in there, or find alternative attack paths. That's why I do the sharing, so that everybody can kind of benefit from that. And I mean, that's also how I learn. I learn also from other people that help me get started. That's helped me like reach the audience that I have. That I'm not just blogging like into the void where no one reads it. So it's all about like receiving and giving back, right? So, and also the things
Awesome.
that you do for the community to give these people a stage to help them share their story. That's also like really awesome. So thanks for that.
For me, it's a fun thing. I get to bring on people and talk to them one on one, right? So, like for me, that the hour that I spent with you itself is worth it. Cool. So, thanks so much, Dirk-jan. I'm looking forward to your next blog post. It'll always be an interesting one. I get my coffee ready and then I sit down and love going through the research that you share. So looking forward to it. Whatever you write, it's going to be amazing and very interesting. And I'll come off learning something. So that's what I really like about reading stuff from the community.
All right, I'll make sure to make the next one a good one then.
Cool, awesome. Thanks again.